everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Maya Jikic, and I'm an associate professor and the executive director of the Self-Development Lab here at the Robbins School of Management. I want to extend a special thanks to today's co-presenters, the Institute for Gender and the Economy and Spectrum Works, powered by Substance Cares, a job fair for people with autism. So thank you especially to Neil Forster and Caitlin York for their collaboration in planning today's event. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So here we are at Robbins School of Management. We think a lot here about what factors drive a vibrant and productive company culture. We know that organizations that harness a diverse and unique workforce that is unified toward a common goal will see increased bottom lines, and yet there is a brilliant community of neurodiverse minds that are often not being fully considered or meaningfully integrated into many industries. So today we have assembled a panel of experts to discuss the barriers that face the autistic community when seeking employment and strategies to bridge these hiring gaps, to enhance workplace culture, to support divergent thinking. And it is now my pleasure to introduce them to you. A quick note that we had planned for the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disability, Kamel Kara, to be here today, but unfortunately a last-minute issue has come up for her and she sends her regrets. However, we're thrilled that the Honorable Mike Lake has stepped in. So I'll start with introducing him. Mike Lake is the sixth-term Conservative Member of Parliament for Edmonton Wetaskiwin. He has served as Shadow Minister for Youth, Sport and Accessibility, International Development, and Mental Health Addictions and Suicide Prevention. Before entering federal politics, he worked for 10 years with the Edmonton Oilers Hockey Club. Mike has 2 adult children, his son Jaden and daughter Jenny. The Lakes have been active supporters of autism organizations and neurodiverse individuals while sharing their story of life with Jaden, who has autism. And so we'd like to introduce you to Jaden with this very short video.
When it comes to putting away library books, Jaden Lake leaves others in the dust.
Jaden, can you do these ones too?
He's not just fast, he's accurate.
He's better than us at most of these tasks. He just knows exactly where everything goes and how to do it.
Jaden has autism. He was diagnosed when he was 2. Now 19, he volunteers at this school library in Edmonton. While he's nonverbal, he's an enthusiastic worker.
You like lurking in the library, Jaden?
Jaden also catalogs and labels and works with computers.
He could work in an office or a bank or anywhere where there is numbers and organization.
He's excited to work. He's excited to keep working.
Jaden's father is Edmonton MP Mike Lake. He wants employers to give adults with autism a chance.
He wouldn't be able to do a job interview. That would be a challenge for him. So if he wanted to work in a library or a warehouse or somewhere where he would be able to use these skills, he would need somebody to help him. He would need somebody to communicate for him and explain what it is that he's good at.
Research shows adults with autism spectrum disorder are underemployed. An Ontario study revealed only 13% work full-time. Just 6% have part-time jobs. In Calgary, Garth Johnson wants to change that. His company connects businesses with adults with autism in software and website testing.
Dedication, commitment, focus. They will do this job again and again and again for a long time, a lot longer than we would do jobs, and still love it.
Advocates for people with autism say it's not about charity, it's about creating opportunities, and workplaces stand to benefit most of all. Janet Dirks, CTV News, Calgary.
Wonderful. Let me introduce 3 other guests. Carol Mendonca is a Deloitte Canada's National Accessibility Leader. She drives the firm's accessibility strategy and manages its STEAM employee resource group and action plan. Carol spearheaded Deloitte's accessibility consultancy, which helps provincial and federal organizations shape their strategies for people with disabilities and neurodivergent communities. She has over 10 years of experience in both the private and public sectors and holds an active designation in accessibility from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. Welcome, Carol. Nadira Badri, welcome Nadira, is a verification officer at CIBC. After completing her undergraduate degree and animation program in Eastern Canada, Nadira relocated to Toronto and taught chess before joining the Ready, Willing and Able program organized by the Geneva Center for Autism. For 3 years, she worked as a salad prep chef and in other roles at United Baker's Dairy restaurant before also joining Enbridge as an e-zone coordinator. Through an online job fair, Nadira found a group of specialists where she was trained for her current role at the CIBC. Welcome, Nadira. Heather, Linka is specializing in neurodiversity employment as a hiring consultant, job coach, and educator. And since 2016, she has worked across social enterprises, government programs, agencies, and non-for-profits, providing education, neuro-inclusive hiring, consultancy, and professional coaching. Based in Victoria, BC, Heather is committed to community service and volunteers with neurodivergent support groups and her local Pride LGBTQ+ organization. Now, if you have questions for our panel today, please go to slido.com, link embedded just below this video, and enter them. We're going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we can during the last 20 minutes. And with that, I want to welcome all of you to the Rotman stage. Nice to have you. Thank you for finding the time for us. And why don't I start first question for Carol? Could you paint a picture of the current landscape with respect to what you see employers doing or not doing to recruit and accommodate employees with autism? What are common challenges you see job seekers with autism are facing?
Thank you, Maya, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us here today for this discussion. So in terms of that question, I've certainly seen a lot of development over the past years. I've been in my role now for 7 years, and I've seen a growing number of companies that have reformed their HR processes in order to really access neurodivergent talent. Employers are starting to understand the unique superpowers of these individuals, which is important. But a couple of things come to mind when observing the current landscape. So I think the first is really understanding from a global and local perspective, seeing more neurodiversity or specific autism hiring programs or processes. And this is where they have trained professionals to really assess job candidates, perform interviews, hire, and also onboard these candidates with a variety of approaches to accommodate all. And that's looking at, the talent life cycle, looking at onboarding and retention and so forth. So I've definitely seen a lot of success with those type of programs. The second is around forming partnerships with non-for-profits that focus on neurodiversity or autism-specific organizations, local agencies, as well as service providers, and those who can really assist in sourcing talent for employers, support them in the recruitment process, and then also to provide ongoing support and coaching to ensure that they're really creating a better experience for the teams overall. And lastly, do you have a question?
So it's a more like an add-on. So in HR pro, it's more add-on rather than having specialized things that can then bring have links to the communities and non-for-profits.
Exactly. And then the last thing just want to mention is that I've seen programs around mentorship and training that can really provide support for employees with autism, just to ensure they're set up for success in the workplace. Most recently, I've seen reverse mentorship programs. We actually do this at Deloitte, where leaders benefit learning from neurodivergent employees as well as the reverse. So we've seen a lot of success of that internally. And then in terms of, what job seekers with autism face, and I'm definitely interested to hear from the group, but we see a number of factors of, difficulty in the interview process. It's quite nerve-wracking, that process for quite a lot of them, as well as decoding workplace communications. So something that's difficult to navigate, especially during social interactions when you're in a corporate environment or outside of it. And then also being supervised by managers with little understanding of autism or neurodiversity. I think this is what employers could be doing more of, and that's education in the workplace on this topic. And you've probably heard of the quote from Dr. Stephen Shore: if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And this is really important because due to fear of bias and stigma, oftentimes employees with autism will choose not to self-disclose within organizations, which leads to feelings of isolation and masking in the workplace. And because of this fact, the number of autistic or neurodivergent employees within the workplace is likely a lot higher in most companies. But I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you. That really provides a nice window into kind of challenges that neurodiverse individuals are facing in the workplace. A question for Mike. This issue is very obviously close to your heart. As a member of parliament, can you help us understand how this issue is being considered in Ottawa and what your advocacy work looks like there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different avenues for that for me to answer that question. So I've been an MP for 18 years, and I didn't get involved in the first place because of autism. Got involved for other reasons, but soon realized there was a significant need across the country. My son at the time was 10 years old, and we'd had pretty good services in Alberta, but not everybody was getting the same level of service. And so the first thing that we started talking about was a national autism strategy. That was 2007. There was a Senate report talking about that and the need for it. And we're here in 2024 and we still don't have one. We're getting really, really close. But, having a strategy that kind of deals with all aspects, diagnosis, sort of early help for young people, inclusive education, employment, housing, all of those things. There's so many different areas that it'll help to address, and they're all related to one another. So employment doesn't just happen in isolation. If we have an inclusive education system, then everybody is going to come out of their education system having met somebody who is different than them, someone who might have autism or some other neuro non-typical sort of what we would define as quote unquote normal. Our normal should include people who are different from us, right? Mm-hmm. And then when we get into a workplace and we're trying to figure out what that looks like, we have some context to have those conversations. We also, back in 2014, the Ready, Willing, and Able program that I think you mentioned when you were introducing Nadira, that was put in place by Minister Flaherty back in 2014, a partnership between what is now the Autism Alliance of Canada and the Canadian Association for Community Living, which is now Inclusion Canada. So that was something that was put in place in 2014 under a Conservative government, but also continued under a liberal government, something that we all agree is important and has really provided some results. But now we got to figure out how do we do these things at scale, because we're still sitting in a place where, depending on who you talk to, 80 to 85% of people with autism are not employed in Canada. And we're missing out on just a tremendous set of skills and abilities that we really need right now if we get these policies approaches right.
Thank you. The next question is for Nadira. Nadira, as someone with lived experience of autism, what were some of the greatest challenges that you encountered when you were looking for employment?
Well, this is before I went to the Geneva.
Yes.
Center.
Yeah.
And actually, it was even before I became a trustee chair. One of the biggest challenges was whether to know whether it's the right fit, but more often than not, if they are going to reply. Sometimes you wait 2 weeks and no reply, and sometimes when you look for another job, but then the first job would reply. So that was the worst part, in all honesty.
For sure, the complexity of just having to apply to many places and then waiting again. Absolutely.
Yes.
Next question is for Heather. how can understanding autism help employers create more inclusive recruitment processes? And what's the best way to educate them on the topic? Can you share an example of a company that has effectively done this and what changes it prompted?
Sure. So firstly, I would say that when you asked about employers creating more inclusive recruitment processes, it's really more than just the recruitment process that I think employers need to be focusing on. Because it's not just about an inclusive hiring process. It's about having inclusive processes already embedded in your organization, or if it's not already embedded, maybe that's um, a little bit wishful thinking, but having processes inside the organization that will be able to receive the folks when once you are initiating these inclusive hiring processes. Because yes, the inclusive hiring and recruitment process is just one small bit of the puzzle. And if we focus only on that, but the things are not inclusive once they're inside, then this can lead to a failure of the person being able to be retained. And then perhaps that can create a negative first impression for the company or the organization. And oh my goodness, why didn't it work? Well, things inside need to be inclusive, I would say, first, and then focus on the inclusive hiring process. But understanding autism can help to create and inform these processes much better because it can allow us to anticipate things that may not work for the autistic or neurodivergent population. It can allow us um, to see a behavior or something as um, as excuse me we can it's sorry, let me start again. Some folks, we can have a hard time determining what's behavior and what is autism. So if we understand more about autism, we can have a more whole picture about this person rather than just something that we're not used to and creating an accidental judgment about that.
Mhm.
So I would say the best ways to educate employers on this topic would be number one is including the neurodivergent voices. Um, there's a saying in the community, nothing about us without us. So it's really important to leverage neurodivergent voices when you're creating these when you're educating employers and creating these different processes. That could look different depending on what kind of organization you're in. If you're a larger organization, it's quite common or popular to form an employee resource group. So this is a really good way for you as an employer to have a group of employees that either identify as neurodivergent or perhaps or include allies in the organization who want to help create these more inclusive processes and leverage those voices. So I would say that's really important. Also, as Carol mentioned, leveraging community service providers. We can't expect employers to be the experts on all things autism necessarily, but there are so many wonderful experts across Canada, really. Like Mike mentioned, Ready, Willing, and Able. That's a really good resource for employees to get a start on the education. And as a third part, again, I would say getting buy-in from the top down in your organization and empowering folks at all levels of the organization and within different processes, not just the recruitment process, to start making it. It's like it's a culture shift, really. It's a big deal, and so it has to happen at all levels. And then you asked about an example of a company that has effectively done this. Um, so you initially did ask about the recruitment process. There are companies that do a good job with the recruitment process specifically. I would say Ernst & Young does a really good job. A lot of organizations that have neurodiversity employment programs inside, like Ernst & Young does, or IBM does, or Specialist Sterna, or Auticon. Those are ones that stick out to me, but they have really focused in on the neurodiversity and autistic population.
Awesome. A question for Carol. What key elements have you seen to be most effective when they're integrated into company policies? So for companies and HR teams that are looking to improve their policies, what changes do you think, if they incorporate in their policies, would make the biggest difference?
I would say, so I'm going to echo quite a lot of the comments made just by Heather, because I think it is very relevant to this point. So the first step before thinking even about reforming your company policies is to understand how your people are feeling. So it's important to gather feedback from your employees with autism or those that are neurodivergent to help inform decisions in your policies and your practices. So whether it's an anonymous survey, one-on-one discussions, or even gathering insights through your internal employee resource group, as Heather mentioned, this is really the first step. In terms of a few key elements I could think of, so it would go beyond HR policies. It would actually affect a number of things within an organization, like thinking about digital accessibility, thinking about procurement. There's a lot that goes into really reforming an organization, but specifically around the talent lifecycle and hiring process, you can incorporate small changes to really ensure the entire process is inclusive. For example, using inclusive language on job descriptions, demonstrating your organizational commitment to DE&I, or providing questions in advance of interviews, and redefining the ideal candidate criteria for interviews, performance cycles, and even in promotion to ensure that people really have a level playing field, to be honest, and setting those clear expectations. Because Nadira mentioned a couple things around not hearing back from employers. And I think setting those clear expectations is very important when you are going through a recruitment process. So those are some of the small changes. But in addition to that, outside of talent and recruitment, I think ensuring training is ongoing and mandatory for all employees, because this really helps create a better culture and understanding of your own people. And then thinking about really integrating accommodation guidelines of what that really looks like and how organizations will ensure that they're creating an inclusive and accessible environment for all, which may mean at home, because quite a few people work from home now, or in the office. So really setting expectations on what that looks like. And then the last thing that I think is very important is also providing accessible communications in ways that takes all abilities into account, and really defining what that looks like for the organization. Because all of these things, when you have a wraparound approach, really provides that positive experience and helps people feel comfortable, which is what we want as an organization. So those are some things I could think of.
And Carol, I just want to follow up on something you said. You said that the number of people mask, which is that they do not disclose they have autism, which then leads to difficulties in communication and so on. And do you think that these policies, if they were instituted, would make it more likely people would not mask as much?
I think when you move from embedding accessibility and inclusion into the organization rather than providing individual accommodations, it actually changes the culture. And Heather mentioned it a couple times, but we're looking for a culture shift. And when you do that, people feel more comfortable and they're willing to share their experiences. And then this comes across in many different ways. We do a lot of storytelling in our organization, and I see it more broadly, where people are more comfortable to share their own stories, whether they're, just coming, they were diagnosed with autism early on, or they're an adult recently diagnosed with autism. Everyone is on their own journey of self-disclosure and discovery. So it's important we keep that in mind, but embedding these small things will actually change the organization to be more accessible, as opposed to providing individual accommodations when you can actually benefit everyone.
Maya, can I jump in a bit too on that? Just a couple of things. So first off, to I think the point Carol's saying is, when we do it right, everybody benefits from it. So it doesn't just increase the effectiveness of the person with autism. Many of these things, if we do it right, they're going to impact everybody's experience working for a company. What I've learned from Jaden in 28 years has helped me immeasurably in my interactions with everybody. Just how to kind of connect and pay more attention to what he's trying to tell me without, of course, he doesn't use words the same way we would use words, and he doesn't type, even when he types, he doesn't. So you have to connect differently, but the patience that I've learned and the attentiveness to maybe nonverbal cues has helped me in all of my relationships. I would just also, if I could, just weigh in from the experience with Jaden. Jaden is not working right now, not for pay. He's in a program here in Edmonton and he's volunteering in a library, but the goal is to get him working. But if I could just give an example for people watching of what success might look like, because we've contemplated it a lot. In the school library environment, he was protected. Everybody knew him. He always had another student with him. There were teachers around in the library, and it was a fairly small library, and he rocked it. He was unbelievable working in that library, as you see in the video. But if you were to put him in a large public library, it might be a little bit more of a challenge for him because he's super excited to put the books away. But if he piles the books on one of those big metal carts and he's racing around the library putting the books away, people are just speed bumps to him. So that's a bit of a challenge. You have to watch that. To unlock that potential, you have to build an environment that works for him. And the environment that works for him, I think, would be an environment, for example, where you have him working in a pair with another person whose job it also is to put library books away. Not a person, we make the mistake of thinking sometimes in society we're going to attach a worker from an autism program to him whose job it is just going to be to supervise Jaden. And then we take that worker out of sort of productive society in a sense so that Jaden can work. Well, a better model would be if the library hired somebody and that person and Jaden did the same job, but that person, part of their job on the team was to help watch Jaden. So if Jaden, if he's excited or if he's a little bit anxious about something, there's someone that's paying attention to that. Make sure he doesn't leave because Jaden could decide that he wants to go somewhere and he's not aware of danger. So that would be a challenge for him. If he has to go to the bathroom or something, someone that he could kind of communicate that with just so that they know what's going on. Little things that just, you have to help him mitigate sort of what could be potential challenges to unlock this massive potential if we get it right. And in his case, that might be a job model that might work for him.
It's interesting what you mentioned, Mike, about the fact that how much people who are what we call neurotypical can learn from people who are neurodivergent, and how much it can unlock their potential to be interacting. And what you're modeling basically, and what you're mentioning for Jaden is kind of paired learning on both ways in which people can both get informed and they can learn and they can individualize the process so that it can unlock both Jaden's potential and whoever is paired with him to work. So that's
absolutely. And you saw that in the video with the student that was working with him, but we have other videos of him being included in musical theater. Almost always the story is that there's someone paired with him, and when they interview that student that was paired with him, they're almost always super excited to share what they've learned about how to unlock Jaden's potential and how great he is at the thing that they're working on. But that pairing, that teaming up is really, really important.
And which in turn sort of unlocks their own potential as a person, empathetic person who is observing. So while we're on this topic of individual, like what can be done individually, one more question for Nadira. Nadira, what are some of the things that your employers did that help you do well at work?
Well, I actually have a couple of personal stories for this one. One is from the United Bakers Dairy Restaurant, and the other is from my current job, from both our former managers. There's one manager. There was something scary that happened at the baker, and my manager noticed, and she approached me. She allowed me to be open about it. And similarly, my manager here at CIBC did the same thing. He noticed, even though I did not say anything, and it was there. Then I realized I did not have to mask as much as I did in the outside world.
It's interesting because it's interesting you're bringing up this idea of that people being able to observe, who can actually see things that are observing in a different way. That could be very helpful. Please continue on. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, it's okay. I did with the CIBC. I tried not to make it obvious, but I guess he could tell that something was up, and it was then I did again. I found that I did not have to mask as much, and I did not have to be afraid. And with bakers, well, the scary part, it just really made me stiff. And although I had to get on with my work as much as possible, it was still noticeable that I was scared.
Mm-hmm. And I guess your manager's response helped you work through that fear.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the one at United Bakers, she told me that if anything like that happened, to let either the managers know or even the bosses know. And it was the same with the CIBC manager. We were told from the get-go in CIBC, if anything scares us, to let our managers know. Mm-hmm. We can trust our manager, another manager that we trust.
Wonderful. What I would love is just to ask a couple of questions, and any of you who would like to answer, please kind of raise your metaphorically hand just so we can answer the question. So for each of you, what do you think is the most common misperception when it comes to autism in the workplace?
I can start. Well, the first that comes to mind is that they communicate, learn, and think the same as you. It's not typically the case. But then the other thing that comes to mind is that autistic folks can only do one type of job. In my initial stages of working with employers, a lot of them will think, oh, well, I guess we need to think about jobs that they're not going to be talking to people or client-facing roles, or that they should be doing repetitive tasks or something that's a little bit more on the mundane side. So that's a myth. That's not the case at all. And in fact, the types of jobs that are appropriate for autistic and neurodivergent folks are just as broad as they are for folks who are neurotypical.
It's interesting. It brings back to mind that saying, when you've met one neurodivergent person, you've only met one neurodivergent person. And we really need to keep in mind this like diversity of experience for each person. Anybody else about misconceptions?
I would say one thing that I've definitely heard is, autistic employees are not capable of leadership opportunities. And this is a common misconception, and it comes back to understanding their unique minds and their superpowers that can really drive companies to success if they're given the right opportunity to focus on their strengths. But that's something that comes to mind. In addition to that, and this goes for people with disabilities and neurodivergent employees, but that they need expensive accommodations, which affect the bottom line. And I will say that the majority of reasonable accommodations have little to no cost. And if there is an accommodation need, it's often a one-time cost, or it's outside of a typical accommodation. For example, flexible working schedules, or more time on tasks, or providing written information as opposed to verbal. These are all things that we understand are just misconceptions. So,
go ahead, Mike.
I'll say this, and it's been touched on, is this idea that all people with autism are the same, right? I really faced it like when Jaden was first diagnosed, and you would mention that he has autism, and people back then, it was, oh, you mean like Rain Man, right? That was because that was almost the only context that people had back then. We've come a long way since the late 90s. But I think, again, still today, too many people through their life haven't met enough different people with autism. And so people have this idea of this sort of set of skills and abilities that someone might have, or the set of challenges someone might have. But I can tell you, they're very different. And while Audicon and Specialist Sterna do incredible work in sort of one area, but people sometimes default to that sort of IT area and think, okay, that's everybody with autism will be great in IT. Well, you know what? Jaden has skill sets. He's probably not going to be computer programming, but he has skill sets that are absolutely of value. We really do need to take that time to sort of understand the individual. And I'll reinforce what Carol said. Most of the accommodations that we need to make, if we do it right, they're not massively expensive accommodations. They're just things that we probably should have hardwired into our work environments a long time ago.
Speaking of which, speaking in terms of the government and government policies, what would you hope for would happen to open more doors for people with autism?
I hope that ultimately, I'd love to see us scale up programs that are working. So we've got Ready, Willing, and Able right now. There are programs at the provincial level in different provinces that are working. So I'd like to see us scale that up. I still think critical to getting the employment and housing things right is inclusive education. So even working to further maximize inclusion in schools so that every single person comes out into the workplace more aware of what neurodiversity looks like, the full range of neurodiversity, because they've met people across the spectrum, right? That will make things a lot easier as we kind of move forward. And I do think we do need a national autism strategy, but really, really important to also know that that national autism strategy needs to fit into a larger approach that is cross disability, so intellectual developmental disability, and then within the broader disability approach as well. So these things are not, we don't want to get into a world of competing interests. When we do these things right, we're going to create a better work environment for everybody. And really important, when we create that better work environment, we're creating a better human environment. Our society will unlock unbelievable output from recognizing people's unique skills and abilities that we're not recognizing right now.
So as a follow-up question to that, most of the time we're talking about work, let's say neurodiversity in work and the challenges and difficulty integrating both recruiting and maintaining work and adapting it. But there's very little conversation about how neurodiversity and divergent thinking actually contribute to innovation and problem solving in the workplace. And so this is the other part of the coin. Like when you have a person who is different, they think differently, they solve problems differently in a way that could be beneficial for all. Can any of you speak a little bit to that?
Sure, I can start. So the way that neurodivergent minds actually process information is different. It is a different wiring of the brain. And so with a different wiring of the brain, this allows for different perspectives. And so neurotypicals typically process things in a top-down method. It's a survival and efficiency thing where we take our previous experiences, biases, and such, and that helps us to filter with what we come up with a response. Whereas the autistic population tend to do more bottom-up processing, and so all the information is not filtered through these biases and same things that neurotypicals typically use. And so you can expect to get like an original answer that's more thought out, and perhaps it may take a few seconds longer, but you're going to get a more original response. And another thing that I've experienced with organizations is that it's just this underrated quality of honesty. Their neurotypicals tend to be a little bit more wary of expressing things and perhaps hurting someone's feeling if this is a specific project that the manager cares deeply about, like their pet project, and some other folks on the team may be wary to express things that are wrong or going wrong with the project, where an autistic person may be a little bit more upfront because they stick to the facts. And so this is an underrated quality where we can access different original responses and in an efficient way.
Yeah, so there's more mindfulness and honesty in the present moment, which we really sorely lack in our workplaces. We're going to take some questions now. It's 20 minutes to the hour, so we're going to take some questions, if you don't mind, from the audience. Here's a question for Nadira from Sunila. Nadira, how did you think about and find out what types of jobs were you most interested to apply in?
Well, in all honesty, Sunila, I never imagined myself working in a restaurant, much less a bank. But honestly, I took on those jobs mostly for survival, because I at the time when I just came out of animation in school, and it's very hard for me to find a job in animation. So when I met my boss is at Baker's, or at first I was afraid it'd be like a Gordon Ramsay a restaurant, all the yelling and whatnot. There was drama, but the environment was very good for me, and I had very supportive managers, supportive friends, and supportive bosses. Now with CIBC, I took on this job in the middle of the pandemic, and I was very afraid of working with computers back then, and I won't lie, I still am afraid. But I've learned to live with it, and I've learned to work through it. And with CIBC, when the job opportunity first came up, especially with the specialist turnout training, I pretty much said to myself, Nadira, being afraid that you should not have to, no, not should not have, you need to change. You don't know if you're going to get your old jobs back. So I talked to my managers at Enbridge and friends as well, and I talked to my managers, bosses, and friends at United Bakers, and they all told me to go for it. And here I am, 3 years on with CIBC. Well, it will be 3 years in August.
Awesome. So I guess much like neurotypical individuals, sometimes you just need a job and you take the opportunities as they come.
Yes. Yes, especially if the United Bakers bosses, they helped one day with the Ready, Willing, and Able, and that's how they found me.
It really highlights importance of those programs as well. Question for Mike. How is the federal civil service itself or any of the provincial governments doing in terms of creating on-ramps for people with autism into the public sector? I think you're still muted, Mike. Accidentally.
Well, actually, it was because the dog was barking in the background. And so I don't know if anybody picked that up, but he's quiet now. The federal accessibility legislation from a few years ago addresses some of that. I don't know exactly which province might be doing a better job or not doing a better job in that regard, but I do think that it is an opportunity that we need to be looking at. I think when we get the national autism strategy, I think that'll be the idea of government as a leader in these things. But I do think that with the federal accessibility legislation passed a few years ago, I don't think that we've seen the real impact of that yet. So it's one thing for governments to talk about things and even put in place policies around things. It's another thing for us to be outcome focused and start to measure these things. You asking me that question is going to make me go back and see what the actual numbers are and how much progress we've made. I'll say this in my MP office in Ottawa. I have a woman with autism who works with me. She works with me only 6 hours a week because she has almost a full-time job somewhere else. And I know that there are many MPs' offices who have people on the spectrum working in their offices and doing really important work on things that things that are pretty fundamental to the functioning of our offices.
Fantastic. Now, Carol, Priya is asking, she was interested in the reverse mentorship you were mentioning. So can you provide an example and a situation where that happened and just elaborate what the learnings were?
Sure. So when we think about reverse mentorship, what happens, at least at Deloitte, is we partner a neurodivergent employee with a leader at Deloitte. Usually it's a partner of Deloitte. And mentorship and coaching is extremely important within an organization. I would say, from a mentorship aspect, the neurodivergent employee receives that type of advice and guidance in their career development. On the other side of it, what we've seen is the leaders who are receiving mentorship from the neurodivergent employees, they're actually getting a lot more education and awareness, specifically from that individual of, what is neurodiversity, what is autism, how this can affect their day-to-day work. And some stories and feedback that we've received from partners is that they've actually started to benefit from this information, and it's made them better leaders because they are actually able to change the way they work with their teams overall and implement some practices and standards that they find very beneficial to everyone, in addition to that person who's neurodivergent. So we've just heard a lot of feedback from partners and leaders who are engaged in the reverse mentorship. It's a big learning for everyone as well. And those folks end up being champions for the organization and often advocate for this space and the cause because of it.
Great. There's a question from Roger. Heather, if you don't mind taking this question. How can leaders in organizations or managers of teams help create an environment that's welcoming to autistic community? So if you're like a manager or team leader, what are the things that you think you can do to create a more inclusive space?
So I would say even from the onboarding, some managers do a really good job of onboarding their new staff. I worked with one company called Synex Medical, and they had some really good processes involved. And one was that whenever a new person joined the team, whether they were neurodivergent or not, they would create sort of like a little one-page presentation about themselves, who they are, where they come from, if they want to talk about their family, and then how they work best. This is how I communicate best. This is what I need from my team to be a good team player. So that just is I think it's a really nice way of introducing. It is similar to something that I call a disclosure letter. With some neurodivergent individuals, sometimes I would encourage them to write a disclosure letter that would talk about the way that they work best and disclose to a level they're comfortable with, what they need from the team and vice versa. So I was really impressed with that because it gives everyone a way to express that so that the neurodivergent person is not the only one disclosing that. And like we've been hearing over and over in this webinar, like these are things that are good for everyone. So right away, just with the onboarding, I would say that. And then another thing that's really important is feedback. So having open channels for feedback and structure where the person can express things that are going on, things they're having trouble with, and such, and in a structured way is helpful. And also, don't expect the neurodivergent person to know what to say in those meetings. Like managers will book one-to-one sessions to sort of have this time to discuss how things are going, but they don't necessarily know what you are expecting from them from those sessions. So implementing more structure around all the work processes, including these check-ins, is important.
And what would you those check-ins, if it's not just one-on-one and just asking the person, how would you suggest they go about it?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry, what would you, instead of the one-on-ones where you just ask, let's say somebody who's neurodivergent, how things are going? What would you suggest instead of it?
So still having those one-to-ones, but including maybe in your calendar request, maybe there's a template. There's always going to be similar questions that they will come prepared knowing that's what they should be sharing. It's common that autistic people will have a hard time asking for help. They don't want to feel like they're different. They want to be capable. They want to show you that they know what they're doing. So giving them space to and just the anticipation and expectation that you want to know those things as a hiring manager. So certain questions you may include would be like, what's the status on like X, Y, and Z project? I'm having blocks with, I need help with. Those are a few things that you could include, but managers are surprised sometimes when they get into one-on-one, and it's silent and no one's talking. And it's because they didn't really know what you wanted to hear from them. So having these open channels for feedback is really important. And implementing structure around everything. If your communication processes are not clear, chances are they might get cleared up once you are welcoming a neurodivergent person onto your team. So having really clear expectations, processes, lots of structure, and giving things time to build rapport and trust on your team.
Maya, I have one thing to add on that, if that's okay.
Sure.
I echo Heather's comments here. I was thinking more broadly for larger organizations. One thing I can think of is to identify culture leaders or champions within the organization to build a network and co-create programs and projects with them. So these individuals, and we do this internally at our company as well, but these individuals would display a high level of emotional intelligence and empathy, either in their personal life or professional lives, and would typically encourage team cohesion, even though it's not part of their formal role. So it gives them a sense of purpose in their role, and they could informally help build empathy across teams by providing innovative ideas, advocating for the cause, and connecting employees with others. So that's just one thing to take away is champions or culture leaders within organizations.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to ask Nadira is that when Heather was talking about how hard it is for people who are autistic to sometimes ask for help, I noticed, Nadira, you were nodding. What are, if you don't mind my asking you, what makes it helpful? What could a leader do to make it easier to ask help often? Is there something that would come to your mind?
Nothing on top of my head, but this is my former manager in ABC. One thing he has done is that he asked me if I was okay.
Okay.
I know I could be honest with him.
Yeah, so being the kind of person which kind of links to what Carol is saying, being empathetic, caring kind of person, these are the people who are driving this culture change, who seems like somebody that you can ask and who asks you if you're okay and to whom you can be honest with. So absolutely. We have a few more. We have more questions, so we're going to try to get to all of them if possible. So Amelia asked an interesting question, which is, could you please share what challenges people with autism from diverse backgrounds, such as race, gender, and sexuality, may face, and how could company ensure their EDI strategy addresses unique challenges? So that's an interesting question, because on one hand, one can be neurodivergent, but they could also be diverse from other perspectives. And then what we have is a more complex situation. Anybody would like to speak to that a little bit, what organizations can do to make sure that the strategy is inclusive and doesn't just, put everybody into tiny, neat categories? Any takers for this question? Something you all talked about, importance of more cohesive policy, like overarching policy. Heather, you were unmuted for a second. I took that you're about to say something.
Yeah, well, it's a really, really good question, and intersectionality is a really important factor for organizations to be considering, and you can just imagine the additional layers of challenge that someone may have if they're not only neurodivergent, but also a member of another historically excluded group. So perhaps they've just felt comfortable enough maybe to come out as queer in your organization, and then they have this other thing that they're holding, and maybe that they're neurodivergent. So I think it's important for organizations to understand this, that there may be layers, and neurodiversity is invisible, and so there are with race, gender, and sexuality, that could be more obvious, or a physical disability could be more obvious, but neurodiversity is an invisible condition. And so I just wanted to speak to the additional layers of challenge, and that organizations do need to consider the whole picture.
Mike, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and I'm not, I'm not in the sort of HR field in business. I did work at the Edmonton Oilers for 10 years. So I have that background in business. But, I think that as we've tried to deal with, so intersectionality is super important to try and have an understanding of. But I think oftentimes when we're trying to deal with disability policy, we just dealt with this with disability inclusive education. The danger is that you try to solve everything at one time, and you won't make a move until you solve it all, and we don't do anything. We just freeze because we're trying to consider 15 million different angles, and you can't. So I think you've got to recognize that intersectionality exists, and each of these things can create different challenges for someone in an environment. But at the same time, if we do all of the things that we've been talking about for an hour in terms of creating an inclusive, supportive, loving environment in workplaces, a lot of that is going to go a long ways to also resolving some of these other challenges. Might be the wrong word to deal with them. Other situations that might arise. The one thing, though, that I will comment on is just as we think about Canada, and our country is very diverse in terms of people's backgrounds and where people have come from on their journey to Canada, in terms of their cultural backgrounds, country backgrounds, and things like that. The way that some communities think about disability or autism, in other communities, there can be a lot of stigma attached that we might not be aware of in the background. And so someone coming into the workplace, there might be something, if they've just recently, if they're first generation coming from somewhere where stigma is really heavy around autism, that might be a factor in terms of, for the individual, it might be a factor because families are sometimes involved in these employment situations and support situations. And there might be a factor in the background that you're not aware of. So just kind of understanding that, I think, would be something that might be worth having on the radar.
Absolutely. The importance of broader education for everyone. I feel like we could go on for a long time, but unfortunately we have to close the session. Nadira, Heather, Carol, Mike, thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you so much for teaching us. I feel like I learned tons, and I'm sure that people who have been listening in have as well. I just want to give a quick plug to Spectrum Works Job Fair, which is next Monday on April 8th. If you're interested in more information, go to spectrumworks.ca. There will also be a link to the website in the follow-up email you will receive tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. We hope to see you at Rotten future events. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.